Hello readers, I'm Jessie Quinn from Couple Books, and let's chat about BookCon. Now some of you may have already heard about what's been going on with BookCon. Perhaps you heard about it on Twitter or bookriot.com, or maybe you watched Rincey's video last week, so you have a good idea of what's been going on with the situation. But for those of you who are unaware, BookCon is an event that is taking place during Book Expo of America this year on May 31st. It's an event that's geared towards readers and not industry people, and that is important because Book Expo of America tends to be more geared towards industry people. It's an industry event. BookCon recently released a list of panelists for a Kids Lit panel featuring what they said were the top authors in kids fiction today, and the panel only consisted of 4 white dudes. A lot of people took issue with that, and so BookCon released a statement saying that they would try to do better and that they're committed to diversity and etc, etc, etc. Last week they released their general guest list for all the panels at BookCon, and everyone on that list is white or a cat. There's not a single author of color on a list that has almost 30 people on it. What they did when people very rightfully criticized them for their lack of diversity on their panels and for the exclusion of authors of color at this event, they just went silent for 4 days. Their Twitter stopped putting out updates. There was no mention on their Facebook. They didn't release a statement until Monday of this week, and when they did release the statement, it was through Publisher Weekly at the bottom of an article in which they just commented on sort of the controversy. Now, the vice president of ReedPOP, the company that is organizing BookCon, ended up releasing a statement the same day to Book Riot addressing the criticisms that have been launched at BookCon for excluding authors of color, although it really just sort of repeats the party line of we're committed to diversity and we have heard our readers' concerns. What I think is particularly important about the statements that have been released from BookCon is that they have not been released on any official BookCon channel. They've been released through other websites like Publisher Weekly or on Book Riot, a website dedicated to talking about books, but not an official contributor or collaborator with the BookCon event. In fact, they're not even covering the BookCon event because of the lack of diversity in the panels. They could have turned this entire situation into a learning moment, and they didn't. They went silent for 4 days and then finally released a statement when the situation wouldn't go away. And the statement isn't even anything particularly substantial. It doesn't give any concrete apology, and it doesn't give any concrete action plan of moving forward. Now that is a very, very brief summary of what's been happening. I recommend checking out Rincey's video because it's a lot more detailed. With that all in mind, I am interested in thinking about what we can do about this situation, because this is an event that caters to readers, and BookTube on YouTube is a community of readers. So this event is targeting us as an audience, and yet it is also an event that is excluding authors of color and is not being mindful about the makeup of their panels, and I think that's something worth talking about. This event is aimed towards us. Is this an event we want to see? If you're upset by this situation, I recommend that you let BookCon know. You should give them feedback about how you're very disappointed in their lack of diversity on their panels. You may be thinking that because BookCon and ReedPOP have released statements that there's no point in continuing to send them feedback. However, if we expect them to ever take note of the feedback, we need to keep giving it to them. And if we expect next year's event or any of the other events that ReedPOP organizes to be mindful of how they do the lineup for their events, then we need to keep sending them feedback. Another huge thing we can do is support authors of color. This means buy books that are written by authors of color, review books that are written by authors of color, talk about books that are written by authors of color. And when authors of color get invited to speak on panels or attend events or attend book signings, then support those events. And lastly, I would recommend joining the We Need Diverse Books social media campaign that's happening at the end of this week. It is a 3-day campaign kicking off on May 1st, talking about the importance of diversity in fiction. It was inspired by both the recent articles talking about the lack of diversity in kids' fiction and young adults' fiction. These articles have talked about how most protagonists and most characters in those genres are white, straight, cisgender, able-bodied kids, and how that doesn't reflect the audiences that are picking up those books and how that's a problem. It also, of course, was inspired partly by what's been happening at BookCon. Now, those are just 3 ideas off the top of my head. I'm really interested in hearing about what you think we can do as a community and as individuals to respond to this situation. What can we do to both support authors of color and to make sure that BookCon is aware that we're not happy with the way they've done their programming this year? I think it's fairly clear that BookCon is trying to sweep this situation under the rug. They're really hoping that it just goes away and that they don't have to respond to the criticism in any meaningful way. And because of that, I think it's very important to keep talking about this and keep discussing this situation. If we stop talking about it, then we're sweeping it under the rug for them.